Howdy guys, welcome back to BIG Photography. This is Ben, and I know it's been a while since my last upload, and I know a lot has changed with Affinity Photo during that time. Mainly, we now have a new version of Affinity Photo, basically just called Affinity, where they've taken all their previous programs and put it all into one and made it free, which is very nice. So I think from this point forward, I'm going to make my videos mainly using Affinity, or I guess Affinity version 3, mainly because everything you can do in Affinity you can do in Affinity Photo version 2, and if there ever is a difference, I will definitely make note of that. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about layer types. So Affinity has many different types of layers that operate and behave differently. And it's very useful to understand how each one of these layers works, because sometimes you might be working on one layer and it's not performing or behaving the way you think it should because you should be working on another layer. Or it might be more beneficial to work in one particular layer type than it is another. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover all the main layer types in Affinity Photo, and I'm going to show you how they work and how you can use them. So with all that being said, let's just go ahead and jump right in. All right, guys, welcome back. So let's go ahead and jump into the different types of layers you will see in Affinity. Now, I will say that because I come from an Affinity Photo background, when I use Affinity, I'm mainly working in the Pixel Studio. I know there are other studios like the Vector Studio and Layout and things like that. Now, those different studios might have different layer types that I'm unaware of because I almost never use them. So for this video, I'm mainly concentrating on the Pixel Studio because that's the one that is most similar to Affinity Photo. And even though I'm presenting these layers in Affinity, they operate exactly the same way in Affinity Photo version 2. So if you're still using version 2, this information is still applicable. And also the way that I've ordered these layers is kind of by my use case. So I'm going to be presenting the layers I use most frequently in the beginning, and throughout the video, I'll go and showcase other layers that I almost rarely use and a few that I absolutely never use. And I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with a lot of the basic layer types. So here is a timestamp showing all the layer types I talk about, and you can go ahead and skip to the one you're most interested in. Okay, and so with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and take a look at our first layer, and that is going to be our pixel layer. So a pixel layer is probably going to be the most useful layer that you will use. This is something that I use in every single one of my photos. Now, if you haven't already watched my previous video on layers and masks, I do recommend watching that video because I go into a lot of detail on how layers and masks work in Affinity Photo. But here, I'm just going to give a quick little review on how the basics of a pixel layer works. So let me go ahead and load up a sample picture here. And I think the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, why do we want to work in layers? If I want to paint and do some adjustments to this photo, why don't I just do it on this photo layer? So let's go ahead and try that and see what happens. If I click on the background layer, and let's just write a little message here. We'll say something like Tokyo. And then let's say I want to try to get rid of these little corner street stripes. I can switch over to my in-painting brush tool, and then I can try to erase that. And let's say that I find the street light kind of distracting, so I can use the in-painting brush tool again and see if it can get rid of that street light pretty good. Looks like it did okay, missed a little clip there. And then let's just say, that we want to get rid of this guy down here and whatever. But then let's say later on, they decide, you know what, instead of it saying Tokyo, I'd like it to say Japan. Well, that's going to be kind of difficult because I can't just erase this Tokyo part. If I go to my eraser tool and start erasing, all I'm doing is erasing the current layer, and we're seeing what is below it because everything's been painted on this layer. Because I'm on a computer, I could of course just undo everything, but then I could rewrite, okay, let's rewrite it to where it says, my brush tool, where it says Japan, but now I have to go back and redo everything. So this is called destructive editing, when we're kind of physically almost damaging the image. So that's why we like to work in layers. So one way I like to imagine it is to imagine you actually have this photo sitting on your desk, and a pixel layer, which is the first layer we're talking about, you can imagine a pixel layer is like a transparent sheet of plastic that you can put over the top of your photograph. And then if I wanted to, let's say, write a message on here. I could say Japan. And then if I decided I didn't like that, I can turn it off. I can move it because this is digital. We can actually take our layer and we can move it around. We can rotate it. We can resize it. We can do all kind of things like that. And if I wanted to then also erase that street light, I could do that on a different layer. Then go to my in-painting brush tool, which is, I always forget which one it is. I don't like the icons in the newer version. I just wish, where is my in-paint? It's this one. I wish I preferred the old color icons. Yeah, I can come over here and I can delete that. And now I have these on separate layers. So this is just the street light being removed. This is the Japan. And I can continue to do this and make as many layers as I need for my image. So this is why we want to work with layers, and especially pixel layers, because it just allows us more freedom to go back and make corrections, to change things on particular adjustments and not damage our original photo, because when we turn off our layers, our original photo is still there and undamaged. So a pixel layer is created by either coming down here to this checker box icon where it says pixel layer. You click on that, you're going to get a new pixel layer. You can also come over to pixel, new pixel layer, and you can click on that. Or if you notice, for me, I have my shortcuts key set to N. I think by default, it's maybe Command Control N, I'm not sure. I just switched mine over to N because it's just a lot easier for me to type in on my keyboard, and I can get as many layers as I want. So that's just a real quick overview of pixel layer. I do recommend watching my previous video on it because I go into a lot more detail about how these pixel layers work, but they are very useful and there's something I use in pretty much every single one of my edits. Now let's do something a little bit more complex to help demonstrate the next layer that's the most useful, and that's going to be mask layers. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new pixel layer by pressing N on my keyboard. I'm going to go ahead and take the gradient tool over here, and let's just draw a diagonal gradient. Let's change the colors to something like, I don't know, purple, pink, and blue. I seem to use these colors a lot in my work, but that's cool. Okay. So now I have this gradient. Now this gradient pixel layer is covering up the layer beneath. If I hide it, we can see it. If I turn it back on, I can't see the image below because it's completely opaque. Now we can change the opacity of that layer by sliding this back and forth. We want to slowly bring some of that color in. We can do things like that. Okay, so now we can actually look at making a mask for this layer. So what does a mask do? Well, basically the way a mask layer works is it allows you to hide certain parts of your pixel layer. So that way you can only have it be in certain parts, but you also have the ability to bring it back if you need to. So let's go ahead and make a mask for this layer here. With this pixel layer selected, let's go down to this little icon like this where it says mask layer. I'm going to click on that. I think you can also do it by going to pixel, new mask layer. For me, I change my shortcut to M. So once you create a mask layer, it will usually attach itself to the pixel layer you have selected. And if I bring this down, you can see our pixel layer here with our gradient. And now we have this mask layer. And if we click this little icon, or if you hold the mouse over the icon, you'll see it says mask. You'll see this one says pixel. All the layers can be identified that way. So now that I have this mask layer selected, let's go ahead and take a look at the mask. I'm going to hold down Option or Alt on my keyboard. I'm going to click on the thumbnail. You'll see that the mask is white. This means the mask is showing everything on that pixel layer, right? Everything is being shown. Now, the cool thing with masks is you can decide which part of the image you want to hide or reveal. And we do that by painting with a black or white paintbrush. I'm going to go to my paintbrush here and let's go ahead and switch my color to black. And if I start painting on the mask layer with a black paintbrush, let's go and make it a bit bigger. You're going to see what it's basically doing. It's kind of erasing the gradient layer. It's erasing that pixel layer, right? And if we look at the mask, I'm going to hold down Alt or Option, click the thumbnail of the mask, And you can see that the mask is here, and everything that's black is kind of hiding that part of the pixel layer from the image. And so because I used a mask to hide that part of the image, we can now see what's below it. Now, the great thing about working with masks is that if I want to bring that back, I just have to switch over to a white paintbrush. So if I go over here and switch to a white paintbrush and I paint on that mask layer, look what happens. I can now bring that back. So this is really powerful because it really allows you to be very selective about where you want to have that pixel layer take effect. One other thing you can do, you can go over to pixel and you can say invert. And now the mask has been inverted. So if we look at the mask, now you'll see everything's black, which means it's completely hiding this pixel layer. But if I want to bring things back, I can use a white paintbrush on that mask layer to start bringing back that color in. And this might be more useful depending on what you want to do. And let's say, for example, if I switch to a low flow brush and I want to try to paint in like some of this like purple sky here or do something just whatever, I can do that. I can bring it in over here if I want. So depending on your use case, it might be more beneficial to invert your mask than paint your pixel layer in, or vice versa. Okay, so with pixel layers and mask layers out of the way, that's going to bring us to our next most useful layer, and that's going to be an adjustment layer. So let me go ahead and hide these for now. So an adjustment layer is a layer that's going to have some kind of effect over the entire image. And we can do that by clicking this little half circle here where it says adjustments. You can also do them by going to, I think it's pixel, new adjustment layer, and you have the same list over here. So let's go ahead and do one that's pretty easy to see. Let's go ahead and do a black and white adjustment layer. So now we have a black and white adjustment layer, and it's basically made the entire image black and white. And we can change certain things of how the colors are represented here. So by just sliding these sliders around, I can change, you can see the yellow in her purse. I can make it brighter or I can make it darker. And this is going to help you kind of figure out how you want. I can take the blues or the cyans and just change different things to my taste. Anyways, adjustment layers are great because they basically have some kind of effect over your entire image. I can turn it off and the color comes back, and I can turn it back on. I can also change the opacity to maybe get an interesting kind of faded effect there. And you'll also notice that all these layers have different blend modes. Now, blend modes are not complicated. It just basically means the way that layer interacts with the layer below it. But it would be a whole video for me to explain what exactly each one of these blend modes do. And maybe one of these days I'll make one in the future, but for now, let's just stick to normal. Now, the great thing in Affinity with their adjustment layers is adjustment layers have masks already built in. So let's say that I wanted just the background to be black and white, but I didn't want the girls to be black and white. So with that black and white adjustment layer selected, let's go ahead and grab a paintbrush. And my paintbrush is selected. Let's go ahead and grab the color black because we want to hide that black and white effect. Let's go ahead and make the brush a little bit bigger. And I can just start painting kind of over the girls. And, this is very rough. If you really wanted to do this very precisely, there's different ways where you can make selections and do things like that. I have a whole video on how to make kind of precise selections, so you can go watch that. But you can see here is like just by painting in this is I am hiding that black and white layer from the adjustment. And so you could spend as much time to get really precise if you want, but just for a quick idea, you see what I'm doing here, right? Okay. And so there, if we look at the mask, so you'll see that when you do this, Affinity will automatically make a mask next to the adjustment layer. And so this is the adjustment layer, and even still I could paint here if I thought I missed a spot. And now I can see that now they are in color, but the background is in black and white. So that's the cool thing about adjustment layers in Affinity is all of these adjustment layers have built-in masks. And maybe I'll make a video about all the different types of adjustment layers one time. The curves is another one I often use. This allows you to basically create contrast and do different things like that. But anyways, That is adjustment layers. Let's go ahead and hide these. Okay, that brings us to our next one, which I do use kind of frequently, and that is going to be a live filter layer. So before, the way filters used to work is you would have to apply the filter to your pixel layer. And then once you've applied that filter, it's locked in and it can't be changed any further. So for example, you would select your pixel layer. So here I have my background layer selected. And then I would go to Pixel, Filters, and let's try something like a pretty normal one you might use. Let's do a Gaussian blur filter or Gaussian blur. I always forget how to pronounce that. And here you would raise the radius of the blur that you wanted, something like that. And then you would hit apply. And once you hit apply, that filter is now locked in and it can't be changed anymore. You can of course still add other layers on top if you wanted to, do some painting or something. But as far as that filter is concerned, that layer has kind of been altered. And it's a form of destructive editing because we can no longer go back and change that blur amount. And so that brings me to the difference between an adjustment layer and a filter or a live filter layer. An adjustment layer is just changing the math of the colors in the image. So it's making them brighter or darker or changing it to black and white or giving it more contrast, things like that. Where a filter is a bit more destructive, where it's actually changing the pixels. It's moving the pixels around. It's blurring them, it's twisting them, it's stretching them, it's changing the shape. And so that's why for the longest time, filters were destructive. I mean, you had to apply it to your image. And in this case, we can't go back and change that blur. But that changed a while back. I think in Affinity Photo version 2, or maybe sometimes earlier in version 1, they added something called live filters. So let me go ahead and undo that Gaussian blur filter. And with a live filter, if you click down here, this little hourglass looking icon, you have, I think, pretty much a lot of the main filters that you are going to find in this, in this filter menu. I think there might be a few that are exclusive to this menu and not all of them can be live filters. But a live filter, let's do a different, let's do a radial blur. And a live filter now allows you to make an adjustment, but you notice there's no apply button here. And it's created a new layer and it has the live filter icon. So this is a radial blur layer. And at any point, so let's say I add a new layer and I do some writing on it. I can still at any point come back here, click on that live filter layer and make adjustments to the filter. So it hasn't been applied and it's not really destroying our image because I can of course turn it off. And that one as well. And we still have our original image here. And the cool thing is, just like with adjustment layers, live filter layers have masks built in. So just like with an adjustment layer, if I grab a paintbrush here and I switch my color to black, if I just have that radial blur live filter layer selected, let's go ahead and delete that. I can now start painting with black. Let's go ahead and make sure my flow is up to 100% and let's do a soft brush. And then I can paint out areas of that filter that I don't want to see. And I can still, if we look at my mask, you can see that black area is where the filter is not being applied. But I can still at any point, let's go ahead and preserve alpha. That's going to make the edges not white. I can still come back in here and do any kind of adjustment to that live filter. So this is better than how things used to work, where filters were kind of destructive and you had to apply them to your layer. Now they are live, which means you can adjust them at any time. And of course you can add masks to them. And live filters is something I do use occasionally, but I only use a few of them. So for example, the Gaussian blur filter I use quite a bit if I need to just kind of blur something out or maybe add in some fake camera blur. Another one I often use would be the unsharp mask. And this is just kind of a way to do some sharpening in your image. It's going to be pretty hard to see here on YouTube, I think, but you can see by raising these sliders, I can create a bit more of a sharper image here. And the cool thing is you can continue to work and add layers, and at any time you can come back to your live filter layer and change it remove it, and make any other kind of adjustments that you need. So live filters are very cool and fun to work with. Like I said, I think most of the filters in here, and I know for this new version of Affinity, they did add some other more fun filters. I think like this glitch one is a new one that I've played around with a little bit, but it does have some kind of cool like effects if you want to kind of create like a kind of weird glitching kind of effect. It has some really cool things if you want to do stuff like just really kind of creative type stuff. There's definitely a lot of cool things to play with. So definitely spend some time and check out all the really cool filters that are in here. But for the kind of work that I do, I'm mainly sticking to the basic filters like sharpening or doing some light blurs. But anyways, there's lots of cool filters to play with, so definitely have a look at those. All right, let's move on to our next layer, which is something I actually do use quite a bit, and that is going to be a fill layer. Now a fill layer, you can go to Pixel, New Fill Layer, and this is basically going to fill in a layer with a color. Now the cool thing about this is that we can change that color at any time. So if I go to my move tool here, and I can move the sliders around, and I can change that color. Now, usually I use the fill tool when I'm doing it with a different blend mode. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and change from normal blend mode to something like soft light, and maybe just pick like a warm color here. And you can see by doing that fill layer, I kind of added like some kind of like warmth to the image, like maybe giving it more of like a sunset kind of sundown kind of feel. You could tweak and play around with this as much as you like. So a fill layer is very useful because it allows you to just basically cover the entire image with a single fill color. You'll see here it's a little paint bucket icon. And you're not limited to just a single color. You could also put a gradient over there. And now I can make a gradient. Let's go ahead and change the gradient. Let's do something like a teal up in that corner there. And then on here, maybe like a kind of red, something like that. Okay, and so same thing here. Now that fill, if I go ahead and hit Alt or Option on my keyboard, you can see that's what the fill looks like. But because I'm doing it in this soft light blend mode, it's having a different effect, where if it was normal, it would just look like this. And so usually I'm using a fill layer in usually a soft light or an overlight blend mode, sometimes in screen, sometimes linear burn and multiply, depending on the effect I'm trying to achieve. So fill layer is also a very useful layer that I often use kind of in the color grading process. As you can see here, it kind of adds like a nice little color effect while still looking kind of natural. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the next layer type, which is going to be the image layer. So an image layer is basically allows you to put another picture inside of your picture. And we do that pretty easily by going to File and Place. And here I already have a picture ready to go, Tokyo. I hit open. Normally your icon would change here, but for some reason, you know, Affinity's still got its weird bugs. It's not changing. But if I click and hold, you'll see I'll be able to basically scale this new image in. And then now it is a image layer, which means that this kind of image is kind of embedded inside of my current image. And you have the ability to scale and move things around to place it wherever you wanted. And you could do other kind of effects and things like that. So that's a quick way to basically add in another picture into your current canvas so that you can work with it and manipulate it there. Okay, let's turn that off. Now, another layer that I sometimes use is going to be the shape layer. And you can come over here and you will have your different tools. These are the different shapes that you can make. Let's go ahead and start with something simple like a rounded rectangle. And I'm going to just click and drag, and I now have a shape. Now, the cool thing with shapes is that these are technically vector images. So they're not actual pixel layers. They're more like mathematical points making a square. And that way I can rotate it and I can scale it, and you're not going to lose any quality. So if I scale really big, and let's just zoom in a lot, you can see that even though the rest of the image has become pixelated, my shape has not. It is very, very smooth. Even if I come all the way in, it never gets pixelated because it's not actual pixels. It's actually just mathematical points telling how to create this image. And so shapes are pretty fun if you are using them for different kind of graphic design stuff, different things. There are all kinds of different shapes. A lot of them have different parameters that can be adjusted. Let's go ahead and delete this one. So for example, there's things like a star tool, and I can do this. And of course you can change the color up here. I can change it to a gradient or change it to whatever color I want. You can add different borders, and let's make the border a little bit different. That's an ugly color. Let's make it a little more cooler looking right there. And a lot of things will have, like I said, different parameters that you can adjust. You can change the points, you can change the inner radius, outer radius. You can do all kinds of different things with your stars and just do different kind of stuff. You can skew them, all kind of things with shape layers. So shapes are great, and there's a lot of things you can do with shapes, but it's kind of beyond the scope of this video. This is just kind of a basic introduction to the layer types. So let's go ahead and delete that one. Okay, the next layer type we're going to look at is a curve layer. And so it's kind of similar to the previous shape layer where I was talking about its actual just points. A curve layer you're going to make using the pin tool, which is here. And this is basically going to allow you to kind of make kind of really nice curves. Now, I'm no master at the pin tool. I always kind of seem to be struggling to have it make the shape that I want to make. Let's go ahead and close that here. But then I can come over here and change the node tool, and that'll allow me to then reshape things as I like. I can even double click here to add another point, and you can do all kinds of interesting things. Right now there's no fill, but you can add a fill, and I can still, you know, change the shape and the curve and do stuff like that. So that is basically what the curve tool is it allows you to kind of create curves. And just like that shape, if I zoom in here, you'll see that it never gets pixelated because it is just mathematical points. These tools, the shape tool, the curve tool, are mainly used when you're doing graphic design type things. So that's why for me, because I'll do a lot of photo editing and photo retouching, I don't get a chance to use these tools too frequently. Okay, now let's go ahead and look at some of the other layer types, which are going to be text, because you can do some really cool things with text. I'm just going to kind of briefly go over it without going in too much depth. Now, when you go to your text tool, you've got two types. You have artistic text tool and frame text tool. So on artistic text tool, you click on it, you click and drag, and then you're going to get your shape. And let's just say like BRG. And then I can highlight this. I can go over to character, and I can pick one of the fonts. Let's see, I think I have some free fonts that I got from Affinity because I had previously purchased Affinity Photo version 2. And this one seems cool. And oops. And that is my font here. And because it's an artistic font, I can scale it and I can rotate it and I can do different kind of things to it to make it look how I want to look. Pretty neat, right? So the other text tool was going to be the frame text tool. And in this one, what you do is you kind of set a frame where you want the text to be, and then you click on there and you can type kind of like you were typing in a Word document. I'm gonna go ahead and paste something I already have prepared. So I'm gonna go ahead and paste there. And you can see that as I move this box around, the text is going to kind of conform and stay in that box, which is very useful if you are doing any kind of page layout, graphic design stuff, where you could you want the text to only be in a certain spot. That is the frame text tool, as we can see when we hover over this icon here. Okay, now some of the cool things that you can do with these text tools is combining them with shapes and curves to do really interesting things. So let's say, for example, this frame text tool is kind of hard to see against this background. Well, what I could do is let's go ahead and take a new shape. Let's do rectangle. And let's just go ahead and make a shape like this. Let's change these colors. Let's go ahead and turn off that frame, and let's change it to a more, I don't know, softer kind of color like that. Now, of course, what you could do is you could just put that box there. Let's move the text on top of the box so it's there. And then you could kind of still move things around, but it's not confined to that box. So the better thing to do is I'm going to move that out of the way. Let's go ahead and actually delete this, because unfortunately there's no way to put it in the box once it's already typed out. What you want to do is you want to select your frame text tool, and then normally you have this little box icon where you make a box. But if you hover your frame text tool over a shape, you'll notice the shape now changes. I think you also need to make sure you have that shape selected. If you don't, it won't work if you have something else selected. So make sure you have that shape selected. And then when you put it in there, you can click on it. And now if I go ahead and paste that text again, now my text is bound to the confines of this box. So that way you can reshape it and you can do different things like that. Now, another thing you can do is with curves. So let's go ahead and make another curve here. Let's go to my pen tool and let's just do like a curve like this. And let's hit escape to cancel that. Let's go ahead and change this to a brighter color. Okay. And just like with the frame text tool, with the artistic text tool, normally you could come over here and just kind of create your text whatever size you want. But if you have a curve selected and you put that icon over that curve, you're going to see it changes, right? And so if I go ahead and you can put it below the line or above the line. If I go on above the line, click on it, and then start typing, you're going to see that it's going to follow that curve. Now, one thing you will notice, let's go ahead and just paste in that thing that I typed. Now, one thing that you will notice, you have these little sliders here so you can slide them around, is that we lost our pink line. So once you put text on a curve, it basically uses that curve as a guide to kind of set the text, but you also lose that curve. So in case you want to actually have that curve visible, what I recommend doing before you do this is go ahead and duplicate this curve. I'm going to go ahead and right click. I'm going to say duplicate, and now I have two of these curves, and then I'm going to add my artistic text tool on top of that top one. Let's go ahead and hit paste, and that top one has now become a curve path text, but the one below it is still the curve. And if I want to make sure, let's go ahead and slide these little sliders around. If I want to make sure that I can move them both, because if I were to move this around with the move tool, I'm just moving that one. Best is to group them together so you can select them both. I'm going to hit Command G on my Mac, and that's going to make a group. And now I can move them together as a group. And as you can see here at the end, it kind of double backed on itself and now coming underneath. Again, all kind of cool things you can do with text along that line, but that is a curve text tool, or what was it called? A curve path text. Okay, let's delete some things. And you're not limited to just putting text with the artistic text tool on a curve. You can also put it on the outside of a shape. So instead of putting it inside a shape where the text is bound to the confines of that shape, you can also have the text wrap around a shape. So for example, if I were to grab an ellipse tool here, just make a big circle. I'm going to hold down Shift to make it even. And then I can go over to my artistic text tool. And when you put that cursor near the line, you're going to notice it changes to that curve text path. And if I wanted to have text on the inside of this circle, I would put my cursor on the inside here, click down, and you'll notice the circle does go away. Let me go ahead and make my font a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. And I can just start typing in whatever I want, and it's going to follow the path of the inside of that circle. Then of course you have your options up here to change the formatting, just like you could with any kind of word processing program. Now let me go ahead and undo that. Now if I were to put that line on the outside of the circle, then it's going to type on the outside. Now again, the circle disappears, so if you want to have that circle also present, I would recommend duplicating that layer. So with that layer selected, I'm going to hit Command J on my Mac. I think it's going to be Control or Alt J on a Windows. And now I have two circles. And so when I start typing on this top one here, I still have that circle present. Now, of course, they are not attached to each other. So let me go and undo that. I would recommend putting them into a group. That way, when you move the circle, the text moves with it. But those are just a few of the interesting things you can do with text and shapes and curves. So I definitely recommend playing around with that. Okay, so let's go ahead and delete that. And let's take a look at the last layer type. And this is one that I almost never use, or actually I have never used. I think it's just something I've played around with for a little bit. And that is going to be, we're going to go up here to Pixel, and we're going to choose new pattern layer. And when you do that, you're going to be presented with this box. This is a new pattern layer. And you're going to go ahead and set a pixel size that you want your pattern to be in and repeat. So I'm going to go ahead and just say 300 by 300 for now. Hit OK. And then hit OK there. And with my paintbrush selected, if I zoom in a little bit, here it goes. You're going to see this box. This box should be 300 by 300 pixels. And you're going to see automatically on my paintbrush, let me go ahead and make it a little bit bigger so you can see. You're going to see that it's kind of this repeating pattern. So if I start painting in this box, where actually you could paint anywhere, you're going to basically create a pattern. And if I zoom out, you can see there that I have created a pattern. Let me go and undo this. And so I guess with this tool, you know, you could do some interesting kind of graphical effects if you wanted to, maybe change to a different color, just do different kind of patterns that can go across your image. Again, you can change that pattern. If I go to undo this, let's go ahead and say new pattern layer, but let's do something a lot bigger. Let's go like 1000 by 1000. And my box should be a bit bigger, and that way I can make patterns at different sizes. Yeah, I could see this being useful if you're doing kind of some creative design, or you just want to have a pattern in a particular area, because just like any other layer, we can always attach a mask to this. So if I go down here and add a mask layer, then I could go to my paintbrush and let's choose a black paintbrush. And then I could, you know, delete the pattern out, or delete the pattern out of the area I don't want to see it. And so you could always do fun and creative things like that. Okay, so that closes up my video on layer types. Some of these layers are a bit more useful, I think, and maybe are a bit more complicated. So I might come back and revisit some of the other layers and talk about them in detail, especially things like the adjustment layer, because there's a lot of adjustments I use, especially when I'm doing my photo editing and photo retouching. So it might be useful to actually have a more in-depth video talking about a lot of the layers that I use for my edits. But until then, thank you guys for watching. Sorry it's been away for so long, and I guess I will see you in the next video. All right, guys. Peace.